think it's important to know that the primary reason that people seek therapy is relationship conflict. Several studies have looked into this, and it's the primary reason people seek relationship conflict. And the primary relationship is often marriage. So marriage matters, but really, what's the big deal with it? Why should we, any of us, psychologists, theologians, care about marriage? Well, first, marriage matters to God. You cannot read the Bible without getting the message that marriage matters deeply to God. From Genesis to Revelation, from the description of the union of Adam and Eve to the imagery of the church as the bride of Christ, God must care a great deal about marriage, to use it as that particular metaphor. We were, as we've talked about before, really created for relationship. Relationship to God, yes, of course, but also for relationship to each other. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus quotes Genesis in reaffirming the priority of the marriage relationship. At the beginning, the Creator made them male and female, and God said, because of this, a man should leave his father and mother and be joined together with his wife, and the two will be one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, humans must not pull apart what God has put together. I'd like you to think about that carefully for a moment. Marriage trumps other relationships, even parent-child relationships, and the husband and wife are to be so closely joined that they become one. Second, marriage matters to the world. Marital conflict, distress, and divorce are associated with nearly every negative outcome you can think of. Certainly everyone known to psychological and medical science. As just a very brief sampling of some of these, marital conflict and distress have well-established causal relationships with depression. Hostile marital conflict suppresses immune function and increases inflammation. Unmarried men are 25% more likely to die from cancer than their age mates. Happily married patients were over 3 times more likely to be alive 15 years after bypass surgery. Unhappily married men and women even process food differently, leading to greater risk of obesity, of metabolic syndrome, and cardiovascular disease. Marriage matters. Marriage matters even in the workplace. Unhappily married women make less money and have less prestigious jobs than do happily married women. And marital discord predicts more difficulty fulfilling work expectations for both men and women. As we talked about yesterday, marriage matters also for children, in that marital conflict also spills over into husbands and wives' ability to parent their children. And in turn, children of distressed marriages experience more difficulties at school, in interactions with their peers, in their own health, and later in their own romantic and marital relationships. Now, please notice that I said children of distressed marriages, not children of divorce. Mine and others' research has made it very clear, as I said yesterday, that staying together for the sake of the children is not enough. Couples owe it to their children and to themselves to work on their marriages, because marriage matters, and because there are interventions that can be helpful. So what should marriage be? The Bible paints a very different picture of the first marriage in the Garden of Eden than we have today. As we read in Genesis 2:25, the man and woman were both naked and were not ashamed. Okay, this scripture is really easy to gloss over. Oh yeah, sure, fine, whatever, I've read that a million times. But think about it for just a moment. What does that imply? To be naked and unashamed with one's partner really implies a very high level of closeness, of vulnerability, of fearlessness, of accessibility, of acceptance, even a certain kind of innocence. This passage captures something really very powerful about the marital relationship. This sense of being able to be safely close, vulnerable, fearless, is something that we're looking for in a marriage. I'd like us to return to the idea of oneness again. This idea is so important in that not only does it appear in Genesis and Matthew, it also comes up again in Ephesians, where Paul writes, "For this reason a woman shall leave his father and mother and shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is great." Okay, what is that mystery? In marriage, 2 distinct people, a me and a you, come together to form an us. That us reflects the connection between the 2 people who've pledged their lives to each other, but it's easy to misunderstand what that should be. That is, it's not that the us obliterates the me and the you. It's not that the us gloms everything together in one thing. There still is a me, there still is a you, but there's also an us that encompasses both of those things. Something that is more than the sum of its parts, if you will. It's not that the distinctiveness is lost. It's not that the me dominates the you or the you dominates the me. Neither person's identity is lost in God's plan that the two come together in this new and powerful way to create a new entity. There's still a you, there's still a me, but there's also this new and mysterious us. Okay, great. Happily ever after, and they all went away, right? This isn't a Disney film, this is real life, right? All couples have conflict. Every couple in the world has conflict. It's not whether or not couples have conflict that matters, it's how conflict is handled that matters for couples and for their children. For children, for instance, conflict that is intense, that's child-focused, that's physically expressed and unresolved is very, very difficult, okay? So couples who get into a knockdown, drag-out fight about something about their children in front of their children, that's much, much, much more damaging than other kinds of conflict. And the brilliant thing, going back to this idea of resilience that we've touched on a number of different ways, is that the resolution seems to ameliorate almost all of the negative effects, right? So even when couples have a difficult argument, if the child is able to see the parents back together on the same page, back on the same team afterwards, the negative effects of that conflict are largely ameliorated. Now, they don't have to know the blow by blow and, oh, in fact, your mom or your dad decided this, and that's not what I'm talking about at all. Really, they just need to see that mom and dad are back together, working it out together, and things are okay. And that actually is a hugely important piece, because conflict that's poorly handled is associated with all manner of child behavioral, health, academic, emotional issues, and the erosion of the child's sense of emotional security. So much as we've talked about security of attachment, being a very important thing. In terms of a child's emotional security throughout childhood and into adulthood, the parental marital relationship forms a very nice bedrock from which that child can build their own emotional security. And conflict that is handled well provides a wonderful model for children to learn from. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting that every disagreement should be handled in front of children. If you've got a problem about your sexual life, please don't talk about that in front of your children. And as I mentioned before, if you've got a conflict over children, really that's not one that should be talked about in front of kids either. But constructive conflict resolution is an incredibly useful skill to pass on to your child. And parents can both learn those skills and pass them on. Knowing that mom and dad have worked it out and are on the same team is really foundational for children's emotional security, as I said. So what are the keys for handling conflict constructively? Howard Markman, Scott Stanley, and Galena Klein Rhodes together are the group behind the Prevention and Relationship Enhancement Program, in case you were wondering what PrEP stood for. And they have done some brilliant, brilliant work. These colleagues of mine who are at the University of Denver, this is a project that I have worked on throughout graduate school and beyond with them, have identified skills that couples can learn to manage conflict. They've also identified 4 particularly toxic traps of negative communication. That's right, just 4. You only need to avoid 4 things. You don't have to be perfect. 4 things are really key. Escalation is the back and forth, responding back and forth negatively with each other, getting more and more heated, more and more angry, more and more hurtful. Like a rickety ladder, with each step taken, the situation becomes more and more unstable. The thing is, though, partners don't have to hit back. We know better from the teachings both in Proverbs and in Jesus. For several thousand years, it's been recognized that a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. See, negative escalation, shouldn't be doing it. It says so in the Bible, right? Even enemies may respond to turning the other cheek. Okay, making it safe within a relationship means avoiding escalation. So one of the first danger sign is this escalation piece. The second one is something that's called invalidation, and that's putting down the thoughts, opinions, or character of the other. I'd like you to experience what it feels like to be invalidated. So imagine, for instance, that you had a rare day with no responsibilities at all. Had the day off, you could have chosen to do anything. But you chose to make a special dinner for your partner. You rush to the market, you get all your partner's favorite foods, you make a wonderful dinner, you finish putting the dinner on the table, and you're lighting the candles just as your partner pulls up. They come into the house through the kitchen, they pull up short and say, "What the heck happened in here? It looks like a tornado's been through." That thing that you just felt, that's invalidation. And it's particularly difficult in just this situation where you're expected to be validated. You're expecting someone to see, here I was trying to do this really nice, wonderful thing for you. And in fact, what you get back is, what the heck? The kitchen looks like a wreck. This is such a powerful, powerful, powerful thing that differences of only tiny amounts are hugely predictive to outcomes later. I'll say more about that in a moment. Withdrawal and avoidance are being unwilling to get into or to stay with important discussions. This may take several forms in an argument, from avoiding the discussion altogether to getting very quiet, to looking away, to leaving the room, to hurriedly agreeing to a partner's suggestion just to end the conversation. Okay? Fourth one is negative interpretations, which is making a negative and unfair assumption about what the other partner is thinking or doing. That is, a negative interpretation occurs when one person attributes motives to the partner that are more negative than is really the case. So, for example, let's think about mind reading. Okay? All right. When my husband asks, "Are those new shoes?" I can infer several possible meanings to what he's asking. Okay, I might hear that question as, "Why did you buy new shoes? You know we can't afford them." Right? I might hear that as, "Don't you have 40 pairs of shoes already?" 45, but who's counting? I might hear it as, "Those are really pretty and I don't remember seeing them before." Or he might be really just saying, "Are those new shoes?" Right? Those aren't neutral questions. Those aren't neutral questions. Really, they aren't. You know, if I hear him to be criticizing me for spending money, I might feel really defensive. Well, hey, you just bought this. If I hear him as saying, "We can't afford this," or "You have too many already," really? I might get a little punchy with that. But if I hear it in a more neutral kind of way, if I don't make a negative interpretation, if I hear it as, "Really, are those new shoes?" or "Oh, those are pretty," then I'm going to respond in a very different way. So our couples who are more distressed actually hear things in a really negative way and make negative attributions. In the moment, you have the choice of responding if someone is criticizing, complimenting, just asking. You can choose to give your partner the benefit of the doubt, or you can convict them without a hearing. Both sides of negative interpretations are painful, both to the person who has been misinterpreted and to the person who's making that negative interpretation. To hold that negative view of what your partner's doing, thinking, or saying hurts, and to be wrongly thought of as engaging in such behaviors also hurts. So how do we break the cycle? What do we do? The truly difficult thing about these communication danger signs is that each time they're used, harm is inflicted on the partner and on the relationship. And those hurts really add up in a day-to-day kind of way over the course of a marriage. So in our study of 100 couples planning a first marriage, we followed them from engagement to 13 years later. And we found that couples who later divorced in the entire data set, all of these couples who later divorced, engaged in invalidation premaritally only about 7% of the time. Okay? That doesn't sound like much, right? And it was 7% of the time for the couples who divorced, as compared to about 4% of the time for couples who stayed happily married across that entire time, right? Doesn't sound like much, right? It was actually one of the very strongest predictors of divorce. I'd like you to think about it in terms of and I should point out, we had hundreds of variables about communication, about commitment, about the couple's backgrounds, about their level of satisfaction, about the ways they handled conflict, about the things they argued about. Invalidation was the single strongest predictor, 3% more, but over every disagreement for 13 years. Perhaps Solomon was right in Proverbs 19:13. A continual dripping does wear away, perhaps more than just stone. Right? The cumulative effects of just a little bit more ends up having a very painful thing. You might wonder why I'm spending so very much time on these communication danger signs, why I focus on the negatives, right? Well, let's think about the effect of the negatives for just a moment. Say you say or do something negative. You kind of tip the balance in the relationship. You know, you say something negative, we tip this way. So how much positive does it take to make that up? One positive? So I say something hurtful to my spouse, and then I back it up with a compliment. Is that going to be good enough? In fact, our best research suggests that it takes no less than 5 and perhaps as many as 20 positives to outweigh the negative effect of one negative. You can work really hard at heaping on the positives, or you can try and reduce the negatives. And in fact, reducing the negatives is probably going to have more bang for the buck. Okay? It's very important to recognize and stop negative interactions before they have the chance to rob the fun and joy from marriage. Next thing I want to talk about is solving problems and when not to do that. There are actually 6 steps to a problem-solving strategy, approach, whatever. The first one is actually the most important and takes the most time, and that is ensuring that each partner feels heard and understood. Explicitly stated, effective problem solving rests on thorough problem discussion. If a partner doesn't feel heard, if they don't believe that their perspective on the problem has been understood, they're likely to have a great deal of trouble agreeing on a solution, committing fully to it, and or following through on it. Okay. The problem is that when issues are pressing, couples often want to rush to the next steps in actual problem solution. This attempt to save time, however, will actually cost it, as problems that aren't heard and understood most often resurface again and again. Even excellent solutions fail when partners are not committed to them. So let me give you a quick example. We had a couple who lived in Boulder but worked in Denver. And it's not LA traffic, but it's not nice either, right? So they would often make plans to see friends in the evening, and they would make plans that really kind of relied on, in this case, the husband getting home on time. And he would perennially walk through the door late. She would be on him like a hen on a June bug. There, I'm showing my Tennessee roots again. So she'd be all over him. What are you doing? We got to be at such and such's house in 5 minutes and you're late. I can't believe it. Da, 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 da. And he would agree to anything. Yeah, I will leave early next time. Yeah, absolutely, I'll leave early. No problem. And it kept happening over and over and over again because they never really talked out. What is getting in the way? What is the problem? How come this isn't working? And so he never felt heard. He never felt like she understood what he was facing trying to do this. He never had the opportunity to talk to her about, really, it's very difficult for me to get away from work at this time, and when there's this pressure to get home and to do this other thing, this isn't working for me. Really, can we think about what plans we want to make together and how we want to set them up? He never said that because every time he was just saying, yeah, I'll do whatever you want. I'm sorry. And he was legitimately sorry, and he legitimately wanted to make it work, but he never really felt heard, understood, so he wasn't able to follow through in the way he'd like. Okay. So even excellent solutions fail when partners are not committed to them. Part of the problem in convincing couples to be able to talk these things through and to really hear and understand each other is that we often equate hearing and understanding with agreeing, and they are not at all the same thing. Not at all. Okay, so for instance, I don't have to agree that my husband's choice to buy X is a good thing. I don't have to agree that, yes, we needed yet another one of Y, right? But it is important for me to hear and understand why he thinks it is, okay? And if I hear and understand him completely, okay, if I completely hear and understand what he's talking about, why it is that he thinks that he needs to convert our 325 wagon into an M3 under the skin, so take out the entire engine and drivetrain of a perfectly functional car and put in a whole nother engine and drivetrain to the car that it was never really intended to be in. I don't have to agree that that's the right thing to do, but I do need to hear and understand why it is that he thinks it's important. And once I hear and understand, maybe I still don't agree, but my opposition to it went down sufficiently that you almost got to take that car to dinner last night. Okay? All right? If I don't have to agree that this purchase is important, but I do need to understand why he thinks it's so. And if I don't, not ready to move on to problem solution, not ready to move on to how do we make this work, not really ready to work on to how we resolve this. And any attempt to do so is likely to result in frustration for both of us. Okay? When couples find themselves sort of spinning their wheels over and over again in problem solution, and a discussion becomes heated, if they can't find a solution or if the solution's not working, these are all signs that discussion didn't go as long as it should have, right? Literally, when you have the correct problem discussion, it may be this long, and the problem solution may actually end up being this long. Because once you really hear and understand each other, the solution often comes very, very easily. If it doesn't, it's a sign that you still haven't heard and understood. Okay. Furthermore, once couples feel heard and understood, they may actually find that they don't need to move on to resolving the problem per se. Some of our best research suggests that about 70% of couples' problems, things they disagree about, don't need to be solved. They just need to be heard and understood. Okay. On the other hand, some problems do need a negotiated solution, and for those problems, the next step is to choose a manageable size problem to tackle. As I mentioned earlier, the most common problem across all stages of relationship for couples is money. Okay. You can't solve money. Okay, you just can't. Right? You can hope to solve part of a problem around money, right? You can think about how you're going to use your income tax refund, or you can think about what your weekly budget for groceries should be, or you could think about how much you want to set aside for a college fund or for savings or discretionary use or what have you. Similarly, it may be that home chores is way too big of a topic to tackle all at once, but you can manage either laundry or dishes or yard work, or a couple of those even, in one conversation. The key here is choosing a part of a topic that you can reasonably expect to solve. That also rests on the faith between the partners of knowing that they can return to this topic area, renegotiate, re-talk about it again. If you don't have that faith, then every discussion becomes incredibly heightened and incredibly important. If you don't believe that you can revisit it, if you don't have faith in your partner that you will be able to talk about this again, then you've got this really difficult sort of situation. Okay, the third step, so the first step is problem discussion, second step is deciding what's a manageable piece to tackle. The third step is brainstorming. This is, of course, an idea back from the 70s or what have you, where you just throw out all kinds of crazy ideas, throw out as many ideas as you think about them. Don't evaluate them as you're coming out. Don't say, oh, well, this would never work, but here. But you just throw out all sorts of crazy things. And the nice thing about brainstorming is that if you throw out any idea, even those that are not, in fact, workable, it can actually spark another idea that could be workable. You could go down a rabbit trail that would lead to someplace really very cool. In the brainstorming phase, partners try to come up with as many solutions as possible without evaluating the solutions, but rather just focusing on generating as many as they possibly can. And that freedom from evaluation can really foster creativity. Of course, it requires trust to believe that your partner is not going to be judging what you just said. So you really have to have people engage in this freely, because any criticism will dry up ideas prematurely. Once they've run out of ideas, then you move on to step 4 in problem solving, which is agreeing on an experiment. And that's actually a really important thing. Not agreeing on what you're going to do, agreeing on an experiment, agreeing on what you're going to try. Solutions are not, in fact, carved in stone. Sometimes something that seems like it would work really well doesn't work for reasons beyond your control, or doesn't work because it doesn't really fit. So couples can arrive on the perfect solution, if you will, in one try, or they may need to tweak or even throw out the first solution and try another one. Point here is that they should choose a combination or a solution to try, and also to agree both about trying it, but also on how long it's going to be before they revisit it. Okay, so you want to evaluate how it's going, and that's actually step 5. Trying it out, committing to and following through on putting a solution in place and doing so. And so imagine that the couple's problem was washing dishes, and they agreed to try alternating who washed dishes each day or each week. You'd want to give them a fair chance, a fair shot to see how is this working. Maybe a week, maybe 2, depending on what they're talking about. And after the period of time agreed on, they moved on to step 6. How'd this work? Do we need to tweak it? Is this a good solution? Should we try something else? What do you want to keep? What do you want to change? Okay, so those are the 6 steps. The problem discussion, which is the most important one, the one you need to spend the most time on. And then the second thing is to choose a manageable size piece of that problem to solve. Third one is brainstorming. Fourth one is agreeing on an experiment. The fifth one is actually trying it, and the sixth one is evaluating it. It can be very, very tempting to stop prematurely, and the only place where stopping quote-unquote prematurely is a good idea is when you fully understood the problem and you realize you don't need to solve it. Any of the rest of them, you should really keep going. Okay? You should not lock yourself into a solution that you haven't agreed to experiment on, you haven't agreed to try about. Okay? All right. So those are the skills. Really quite easy to learn. You need to avoid 4 things: escalation, invalidation, negative attributions, avoidance, withdrawal. And you need to think about how you solve these problems. Great. Even with these skills in place, couples may still experience difficulty either during problem discussions or in problem solution practice. And there are 4 frustrating situations that signal something else is going on beneath the surface, if you will. When discussions are difficult or solutions seem impossible to reach, one of these frustrating situations may be in play. People may feel like they're spinning their wheels, spending lots of energy but getting nowhere, can't seem to get to a resolution, and just covering the same ground over and over again. I worked with a couple in which the wife said to her husband at one point during our work together, "I don't even need you to be here to have this argument. I know what you're going to say. I know what I'm going to say. I can do this argument all by myself." The argument wasn't about what they were talking about. It was about something going on underneath the surface. A second clue that something else is going on beneath the surface, beyond the problem topic itself, is the presence of trivial triggers. That is when something really quite small triggers an argument or strong feelings well out of proportion to the actual topic. My husband and I once had a ridiculously heated discussion about whether or not a Chevy Astro should really be considered a true minivan or just a smaller size van. That is, was it more like a Dodge Caravan or was it more like a littler full-size van? I ask you, who cares? Why would you blow out an evening arguing about a Chevy van being a real minivan or not, especially when you don't even like minivans? Why would you? Who cares? This is a very trivial topic, and it was connected to who really knows more about this whole cars and performance thing, which is an issue in our family, right? It is an issue in our family. I have won 3 national championships. My husband has won 1. There. Our son Jonathan won 2 before he turned 20, so we're both not the fastest driver in the family. A third frustrating situation is avoidance of the issue. When you find yourself avoiding, oh no, this is coming, I don't want to talk about this, rather than solving a problem, it can be a sign that something other than problem itself is at play. Finally, scorekeeping is a frustrating situation in which one or both partners are keeping track of who's won or lost more often. As we know, the biblical view of love is that it neither seeks its own nor keeps a record of wrongs, right? But when we find ourselves engaging in scorekeeping, it's a sign that something is going on beneath the surface that needs to be addressed.